My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Colin Kapps. It's June 24th, 2025, and we're at Sequitur in Newberg. Colin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
First question to get things started, why wine?
Well, I think like a lot of people I've met in the industry along the way, it wasn't my first pathway in life. So I grew up in between Nevada and Indiana. I spent more of my formative years in Indiana, and I started with an undergrad in biology, and I think for the longest time I planned on going to dental school. I got towards the end of my undergrad, and honestly it was, on all the standardized testing for dental school, the fear of how expensive it was going to be, also locking myself into, or at least the feeling of locking myself into one state with that kind of career and working inside. But in saying all that, I wasn't exposed to much wine in Indiana. It's not exactly a known growing region by any means. They do grow a little bit, but so I drank what I could find, and I found it interesting, and I read what I could read about wine. Still in a little bit of a conundrum about what I was going to do after undergrad. I always, planned on continuing to study. That was just my mindset. Mm-hmm. And a friend and roommate of mine at the time recommended that I study wine. And, initially I told her, I don't think you can do that. That seems like a bogus thing. But it was a night of drinking, and we started looking into it. And I discovered just how many options there were. I could go to Cornell, I could go to UC Davis, I could go to smaller schools. And then eventually I found University of Adelaide in South Australia. My dad had traveled for most of his career, and part of that travel included Adelaide. I had never been there. He loved it, so I think that was part of the security of moving that far away from family and friends. So I did it. I applied to the University of Adelaide's Viticulture and Enology master's program. I moved there summer of 2017, and I spent 2 years there studying. I met friends in and outside of the industry there, and it was an absolute blast. I lived in the city during school, and then for part of the school program I did a harvest, and I lived 5 minutes from the beach in McLaren Vale, working with Mediterranean varieties in a custom crush winery, and it was just a blast. But to find my way back to Oregon, it came to the end of my program, I didn't have a forever visa, it was only a student visa. I wished I could have stayed forever, but I was on wine jobs, as many of us do, just trying to find my next harvest gig. And I came across a listing for Domaine Roy in the Dundee Hills. I didn't know much then about the Etzel family. I read what I could. I thought that they were making really interesting wines, and I thought Roy was a really beautiful project. So I applied pretty blindly. I got the harvest internship. That was in 2019. My first harvest in Oregon, again, moving to Oregon blind, it's just like I did Australia, just kind of blind faith. It all works out. That was a blast. I thought, 2019 was kind of a perfect harvest. I met some of still my closest friends. And like any other harvest, it ended. I, again, didn't know what to do. I actually worked Black Friday at Target, those kind of things. I lived in Salem for a little while. And then I said, I'm going to go back to Australia. I miss it too much. So online at night, Wine Jobs Australia. I find a listing for Kooyong in Port Phillip Estate in the Mornington Peninsula. I kind of wanted to stick with Pinot and Chard. I saw that as the right path, especially, looking into the future and wanting to come back to Oregon. So I traveled there, January of 2020. I first met up with some old friends. It was a friend's birthday, went to Cannes, swam the Great Barrier Reef. All that around us, the world is starting to crumble a little bit. I make it to the Mornington, check in for my internship, work like normal. It's a late harvest. We're just waiting, weed whacking, waiting for fruit, and then everything shuts down. Of course, everyone knows that story. But I was lucky enough. I was able to work through COVID. I was stuck in Adelaide for a little while after, trying to leave the country, but no problem. I got to be with friends. And then I came back summer of 2020, and I moved to Oregon full-time at that point. And I did another internship at Roy with Jared Etzel. And then, that really established my relationship with the family. That was another tough harvest, of course, 2020 in Oregon. Didn't quite think I was going to be able to keep my internship, but I was lucky again. We did a full harvest. Everything was okay. And again, a little bit of off time. I worked in a plant nursery in East Portland, working with a lot of natives and fruiting plants. I met a great new bubble of friends there. And not long into the winter, Jared mentioned that his dad, Mike Etzel, was starting a new project. Sequitur, of course, already existed, but where we are now, the Etzel farm, needed someone to manage the property, work with the wine, sort of be a liaison with custom crush clients. So I interviewed with Mike on a very rainy day here with a lot fewer walls and no handrails on staircases, very little equipment. I was so nervous, but it went well, obviously. He hired me and I started here in April of 21. So I wear a lot of hats here. The Etzels really took me under their wing. Mike has taught me everything about viticulture, outside of what I know from just a textbook, but really it takes work on the ground. And I think the rest is kind of history. This will be, I've been here for 4 years. This will be my 5th harvest with Sequitur. And we also work with a handful of custom crush clients here. Seth Morgan-Long is an AP here, so I really get to pick at his brain when it comes to Chardonnay, which we're lucky. It's a blast.
So I'm curious about you mentioned obviously kind of the stumbling into the fact that you could study wine, that was a thing you could do. What prompted that? What prompted you to follow through on that? What was your sort of level of interest in wine at that point, and what made you think that was something you might like to do with your life?
Level of interest was enjoying drinking it, and I, thought that it was a curious crossroads of a creative outlet and science. I'm very type A. I did a lot of research work in my undergrad, mostly on fruit fly genetics, which is kind of funny full circle when we deal with fruit flies during harvest. But that night with my friend where she recommended that I study it and we just started researching it. She was such a hype person for me, and so it just gave me a lot of confidence that it was gonna be a fine decision. Telling my parents I wasn't gonna go to dental school anymore, it made me very nervous. They didn't care. They always just want what's best for me, so that was a good feeling. And like I said, there was a lot of blind faith along the way that everything would be okay. The program worked out to be fantastic. We did a lot of academic work, but a ton of tasting panels and field work as well. So I just felt like it was going to be a really well-rounded program. So I think it gave me a really good foundation for entering into the wine world. I don't think at any point I really knew that you could do wine without studying, which obviously a lot of people do. But I do think me studying with very little initial knowledge of wine was a big benefit to me. Yeah.
So you mentioned the program a couple of years and a mix of obviously textbook learning and field work. I'm curious about, as you're kind of diving into both at the same time, you're learning sort of the theory and the science, but you're also doing hands-on work. What surprised you about what it is to grow and make wine? What were the surprises along the way during that program?
In the program, it was all new to me, so I took it and I ran with it. Right, it was very strict and by the book. You know, this is how you conduct ferment. This is how you press. This is these are the chemistry numbers that you ought to have, and that gets ingrained in you over the 2 years. And you know, maybe you're just trying to make like a really perfect wine, and then you know, I come to work with Jared and especially Mike, who has 30 plus years of experience in this industry, and he kind of throws the textbook at your face in a good way, and you just learn to trust your instinct a lot more. It's not all about the numbers. We still think the numbers are important.
So tell me about your first harvest. What was the experience like?
I had a really good time in 2019. It was my first harvest outside of like a custom crush facility. So I found it really special to be working with just estate fruit. Actually being able to be like present in the vineyard for fruit sampling, just seeing the fruit right outside of your winery door. Our team was really intimate. We spent 14 hours a day together some days, berry sorting. The level to detail was like a lot more intense than my Australian experience. And just everyone, I guess, the camaraderie of it all, the harvest meals that we would have, I think it was a great introduction into the organ industry. It opened a lot of doors for me. Everyone was super generous about making connections and sharing special wines at the harvest dinner table, and it was a great learning experience.
So you mentioned that you had kind of done a little bit of research on the Etzel family before you landed there. What did you think of the project at Domaine Roy and the, I guess, the wines being produced, the idea of the place?
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought the terroir of it all was very special. I learned obviously about Mike and how much he had done in this area, and then how much he had taught his sons, and how much work Jared had done in California and outside, and in Oregon and in Spain. So I thought he was going to be a great mind to pick and learn habits from. I knew I'd never worked with fruit from a volcanic site before. I thought that was going to be exciting. The care and attention to detail that they gave to the farming at Roy was really special, and that's what my goal was for 2019. I think up until that point, I was doing a lot of work orders and just being a little bit of a cellar rat. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to learn more of the why. Why am I doing something? Being able to slow down and taste and understand, and that's what they enabled.
You mentioned the harvest of 2020, and obviously that was a challenging one. Tell me about your memories of that year and the I guess the experiences of it and the sort of what you had to do to make it through that harvest. Yeah.
So, I moved out to Oregon, loaded up a U-Haul in summer of 2020, and my dad helped me move all my belongings from Indiana. It was already a weird year in that I moved to Portland, and not a very true Portland. Nothing was open. I heard a lot about how fun Portland was, the food scene. I didn't really get to see that, which was fine. But I signed an apartment sight unseen. This is kind of part of the story. The apartment's fine. But then you get to harvest. Everything starts out okay. We get a little bit of Chardonnay that's unscathed. But then you start waking up to stories of fires, and then the sky gets a little bit orange, and then you wake up the next day and it's completely orange and red, and it's 5 p.m. and it's just like a bowl of smoke all the way driving from Multnomah Village to Dundee. So I was very nervous, having rent to pay, and also just a lot of Oregon hadn't experienced this intense of a wildfire, right? That's impacted the industry. So we were all a little nervous that we weren't going to have jobs. We all didn't quite know what to do with the fruit, what was best, should we pick, should we not pick. Luckily, I wasn't in that seat of decisions at the time. I just got to watch and learn. Luckily, we did pick everything, and we got to learn from our decisions. I can't say it's never not going to happen again, so I think it was a valuable experience. If it weren't for the wildfires, as horrible as it is, I wouldn't have ever met one of my closest friends. She was supposed to actually be working at Reese in California, and the wildfires drove her out. She got hired at Roy, and then she got hit with another round of wildfires. That was a really important friendship to establish. Without meeting her, I wouldn't have met my partner James, and I don't know. It's a lot of domino effect.
So the job here, as you got to know the Etzel family and learned about this job, what was the sort of the state of Sequitur when you applied, and what did you understand the role to be?
When I was hired on, sort of every role here is organic. You collect hats along the way, and I knew that from the get-go. I think it was described sort of as a property manager. You'd help make the wines. There's so many bullet points that it'd, I think, be hard to get through, but of course the Sequitur Vineyard already existed. It had an established following. It was being produced and sold in small quantities out of Beaufort. But they purchased this facility, or this property, in 2018. And one of the very first projects was renovating the house that I now get to live in as like the property caretaker. And it was a dairy farm for 80 years, so there was a lot of grit for them to clean up. Luckily, I came in a few years into the project, so a lot had been done. But when I came on board, I had to figure out how to license a winery with the government, and both like federal and state. Some winemaking equipment had been purchased, not a lot, so that was one of my tasks, which was honestly pretty exciting to get to buy fancy new tools. I had to hire interns for the first time. That was something that was a little bit daunting. I'd never fully managed harvest before. There was a lot of news, and Mike took me under his wing. He trusted me to manage this property and manage the team and care for Sequitur wines and our custom crush clients. So it's evolved a lot over time. My days now can look like anything from meeting with a custom crush client with Jared, like I did this morning, to talk through blends just before bottling. Or yesterday I spent most of my day mowing, or I'm pulling weeds, or I'm going through the vineyard to just check on things, or I'm topping, or I'm feeding cats, or I'm fixing a leak in a sink here. It's great. It keeps my day super fresh.
That is an interesting job at a winery, I must say.
Yeah. but it's sort of a normal. If you look at like Beaufrere here, or any smaller projects, everyone has to wear multiple hats.
So I'm curious about you mentioned having to hire interns for the first time. So tell me about the first harvest here and about starting to figure out this space and how it was going to work.
Yeah, so our first harvest here is in 21. I didn't get to hire interns until about June or July, which in hindsight is kind of crazy because now I hire them in February. I still got some pretty good picks. 21 was, a unique growing season. We had this really intense heat waves. We only had one cool room at that time. We weren't completely done with construction, and it didn't even have an official garage door. It had a makeshift sliding door. There were no doors in the barn. All of our tanks were in place. That was fine. There was just a lot of learning on the go. Luckily, I had some experience in that custom crush facility in Australia, and it certainly wasn't my first harvest in Oregon or with the Etzels, so I was really familiar with just how they flow. So that was a good benefit. But like a lot of things in my career so far, it all worked out really well. I had a lot of help if I ran into what felt like an emergency. It just took one phone call and somebody was happy to help.
What's it like running a team of interns?
It's fun. There's a lot of questions throughout the day. I think that's the one thing is when I go home, I don't want to be, I've answered so many questions all day long that I'm ready to just be in silence, right? But along the way, I've found some really great folks that are, super interested in our project, really willing to learn. I'm I think lucky with Sequitur, and that a lot of people are drawn to it and wanting to learn from the family. So we find some really great people. Sam Rose, who's one of our full-time team members now, started as an intern and has been a repeat and now hired on full-time, and he's great. I can trust him to do anything. He's tidy. He's learned my ways and my peculiarities, I guess. So it's great so far.
So as this project has been, you mentioned obviously it was still under construction, it's still been being rounded out. Tell me about what the space has now, what you're in charge of, and what is special about the property here.
Right. So where we're sitting now is in the Sequitur tasting room. This is one of the last buildings to be open in January of 22, I believe. So it's a really intimate space. I don't run this space. It's Joylyn and Adrian. But behind the tasting room and adjacent to it is my house. And there's an orchard for lunches and events or family birthday parties or La Palais, harvest lunches, anything like that. And then behind me is the main winemaking facility that was a dairy barn for 80 odd some years. So there's 10 concrete fermenters in there, some tanks for blending. There's a cellar downstairs that what was the manure pit is now the Sequitur barrel cellar. And what was missile silo is now a spiral staircase that leads to said barrel cellar. And what was another horizontal silo for feed that was harvested across the road is a cellar for one of our clients that's making sparkling wine. So it's chock full sparkling base. There's a wood shop on site. That's one of Mike's many interests. The table in front of us he made. The beams all around the facility were milled on site from trees that were, have fallen around the property. There's a brewery next door to the wood shop that Nathan Etzel runs coattails out of. And then, there's 4 other barrel rooms, one of which Seth occupies, one's our case goods. There's what was land across the road that was farmed for feed for the cows. That maybe like phase 3 or 6 or something of this project will be wetland restoration. That's what it was before the farm took over. There's a lot of things that just keep my day busy. There's always a landscaping project down here to do, or topping to do down here, or maybe some catch wire up in the vineyard to go fix, making a new table, making custom cutting boards for some of our clients. Yeah, I can come in with a plan for the day, but it might change.
You mentioned obviously learning from the Etzels. I'm curious about on the sort of the vineyard viticulture side. Tell me about the vineyard here that you work with and getting to know it and what you've sort of learned about it specifically and just sort of viticulture more in general.
Yeah, it's taken a long time, and I think it takes repeated years of walking the vineyard and just making observations to learn its habits. Mike is up there every day on his walks. So being present is really important to us. It's also a relatively young vineyard. It was planted in 2012 and 13. So it's not yet into its adulthood really. So there are some habits that we've found with certain areas of the vineyard that are ready for harvest at certain times, but it's evolved a little bit even in the time that I've been here. So I collect, being the type A academic kind, collect the harvest data on that to see what we can learn from the vineyard. We've also implemented, with Sam's help, a lot more biodynamic sprays. So we might not follow the biodynamic code to the T, but more to us, it's just about spending time in the vineyard. It's slow. You get to look around, observe, see a patch of thistle, pick it out. You can really observe vigor, watch patterns of what cover crops coming up, the cool air coming from the forest. Learning from Mike is just about being present and taking your time, and he's got a wealth of knowledge. So, this being my, fifth harvest with him, and I'm finally starting to get a feel for the habits of the growing season. But there's still always so much to learn.
On the wine side, I'm curious about your role in your role. What is your role, and has it evolved since you've started?
I think it has a lot. Michael wanted to make sure he could trust me as a hand that plays a role in Sequitur. So 21, I managed all of the harvests, but I took a little bit of a step back and watched them. Them being Beaufrere and their winemaking team still had a role in decisions that were made for Sequitur. Of course, the same viticulture team that farms Beaufrere farms Sequitur. So Mike Jr. is still involved to this day in the farming, and in 21 and 22 was still involved in winemaking decisions. So I got to learn from them, what is best for the Sequitur fruit once it enters the cellar. Just as things evolve, and his role at Beaufrere has gotten pretty demanding. And Mike had been able to observe how I work in the cellar. I think it was 23 was the first year that I made harvest pick decisions. So that was a little scary, but it was actually very satisfying when it all said and done. Mike and I work hand in hand through harvest. He's here every day. He's up at the pick while I'm getting things ready done at the winery. I run up to the vineyard if they need another bin or if they need another hand. but then I make my way back down here to receive the fruit. We taste together with the interns even every night, like after dinner, to see how the fermenters are going, taste barrels, see how our Chardonnay is doing. We collectively make press decisions. We decide just fermentation management decisions together. It's a team effort, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And tell me about the wines. What's special about the wines here?
Well, so it all comes historically from Sequitur Vineyard. So we have 12 acres up there. Less than half an acre of that is Chardonnay. We've actually planted a few more Chardonnay vines where we can, but there's not much room to do that. There's a lot of demand for Chardonnay, as you see around the valley. So we've always had our estate Chardonnay, but starting in 23, we purchased a little bit of Chardonnay from Duration Vineyard. So while it's not estate fruit, it's still very in the family. So it's off Wilsonville Road amongst a lot of hazelnut farms. My junior planted and farms those vineyards, so it still felt very in the family. The site's a lot different than ours. It's a lot warmer, so that helped grow our Chardonnay program. Our Pinot, since moving over to this facility, is all fermented in concrete. So that was something new for the team. And then, something really special that we do every year is a small amphora project. So we ferment into amphora, and usually, it's a small in-house team picked, some of the first fruit that's ready maybe. Mm-hmm. So we all get to spend time together picking that, and we press that amphora wine and just combine it into one and age. So it's, I think, some of my favorite because it's the purest fruit expression of the vineyard. It has a pretty cool following now out of our tasting room. But every year, while there's tradition, we're still, never settling into like boring habits. I don't know the best way to put that. We'd love to work with whole cluster more if the year calls for it. Mike's not done experimenting, and that keeps things fresh.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, you mentioned that part of the job here, there are animals around. So tell me about your work with the animals here.
Yeah. So there's 2 goats that used to live up by the vineyard. They ate a nice blackberry patch up there. So those are Mike and Carrie's goats, but we moved them down a couple years into having this property open. So they manage a couple acres of hillside near my house. I have 2 chickens left that don't so much contribute many eggs, but they're great salespeople. People love them. And there's, I think, 3 cats. So there's one that lives around my house, and when she's brave enough, she'll come into the tasting room. That's rare. And then we have a Char and Sassy that live around the winery. They're full-time mousers. That's actually during this I saw Sassy walk by with one in her mouth, so she's keeping up. Sassy has a kind of special story. She's been here since Mike purchased the place. She lived in the construction shed, and she lived in a pile of logs. And then she lived across the road, and then she disappeared for 6 months. I thought we lost her, but she came back. And then Char actually started his life at Roy. But then he found his way here. Not by walking, but by Jared.
I'm curious about, obviously you mentioned starting at Domaine Roy 2019. What were your impressions of Oregon at that point? Of the industry here, of the people, of the wines being made? What did you think about it that, I guess, attracted you enough to want to move here full time?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I was welcomed with open arms in 2019. I had never been to Oregon before or visited Oregon wine country. This was just finding the internship online and trusting the story that was on the job listing. But like within weeks, Jared and Erica were having me over for dinner in Portland and sharing special wines with me and making connections with other producers. The other interns in 2019, one of them being Justin Niven, he now has, I think it's at this point, 3 harvests with me here as an intern. And he actually just moved out here full-time with his partner, and they're living in Mac. She's working at Cho, and he's still consulting for his wine shop in Colorado and doing harvests with me. So I think just the fact that, I was able to establish those friendships so early on, felt like the decision to come to Oregon was safe.
And obviously, moving here full time, like you said, you moved when everything was sort of shut down. I'm curious about, since you've been here, have you had much chance to explore? Have you had much chance to get to know the industry on a larger level?
Yes, a lot more now than that time. That was a little like isolating, being in a bubble. But through industry parties and through dinners with Mike, and when we opened this tasting room, a lot of people wanted to visit. So luckily they kind of came to us, and I got to meet so many people, and I got to try their wines as well. So I feel like I have a pretty good sense for the Willamette Valley, but I haven't spread much out like into Southern Oregon.
And have you noticed any changes in the industry since you started?
Maybe it's just something that I didn't observe in early days, but there's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of producers. I unfortunately see a lot of fruit for sale online and bulk wine for sale. I think it's a hard market at the moment. We're in, a really fortunate, unique situation here, in that, we make a small amount of wine relative, and we have a pretty good following. So we're doing well. I worry a little bit for, small producers that are just getting going and trying to find their footing, and I hope that it all works out well. In saying that, all of my focus is really with the Etzel Farm and Sequitur. People always ask me, like, when are you going to start your own project? And it's always, maybe not, maybe never, maybe I will. The thoughts run through your mind, and you're always thinking creatively like what you would do. But I think the time has to be right. And the industry is, I think, going through a little bit of a tough time sales-wise, but I'm sure we'll come out of it.
So as you look ahead for the industry, what are some things maybe you're looking forward to, looking excited for, or maybe are there any things that you're nervous about or scared of in the future for Oregon wine?
Well, I'm excited that, like I mentioned, Oregon welcomed me with open arms. I think, it's still really like the Wild West in a sense. We might be losing that feeling a little bit with larger companies coming into play in Oregon, but still I think people are pretty fearless in starting their own projects. So I think that's exciting, and while it might be a tough market, people are still willing to do it and kind of step outside of the box. We're seeing some people plant new varieties that they see are maybe suited for our region, which I think is exciting. They are the brave ones, and I'm sure it'll prove to work out in the end. But for now, I'm still in such a learning phase. I've mostly worked with Pinot, trying to learn as much as I can about Chardonnay now. And we also, like I mentioned, we have that sparkling client here, so learning all about Method Champenois, picking as many brains as you can, and I think we're just lucky that people are willing to share their knowledge. There's not much gatekeeping to be had around here. People are willing to help, and they want to see you succeed, which I find pretty special about Oregon.
So tell me about your own future. What are some things that you haven't done yet that you hope to do? Are there places you want to work or things you want to work with, or projects you want to take on? What's kind of exciting you for the future?
I am really excited to stick with Sequitur. We're still so young, and I'm super excited to see how the vineyard evolves. I can look around me to like Beaufrere's vineyards and see just how special those are in their age. So I want to be a part of a somewhat young project that grows into itself with a good following. I'd love to travel more. That's something I find a little difficult to do just with the job at hand. But I haven't been to Burgundy. I think it would be really special one day to go with some of the Etzels, because I know that they would have some really special places to share and stories to share. But for now, this is home.
Going back a little bit, you mentioned early on that Pinot Noir was something you were drawn to and wanted to keep working with. What attracted you about Pinot, and how, I guess, as you've worked with it more, how have your feelings towards Pinot changed, if at all?
Well, I think, going all the way back to Indiana, I didn't have much tasting experience. So I learned a lot when it came to the tasting panels that we held in like sensory courses in school. And I think I just found that like my palate was most compatible with Pinot. It's what I enjoyed the most. And I think I also found the regions in which it grows to be attractive. And I could see Oregon from a distance, being in the Midwest. I didn't know a lot about it, but the green and the people, it was all attractive. So I think I was lucky that the places I wanted to live, Pinot was compatible with, and we grow some pretty special Pinot here. And my relationship with Pinot, has it changed much? It's just a lot more intimate. I can, see the difference that soil can make on Pinot. And, working with one variety, you can kind of get stuck in a bubble. So it is exciting still to drink outside of Pinot. But it's nice to have kind of the, one independent variable and a constant, so you can always experiment and learn more along the way.
All the questions that I have for you today. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover today that you were hoping to cover?
I think we covered a lot of it.
Covered a lot of it. Excellent. Thank you so much. Taking the time to share your story with us, share this beautiful space, share one very friendly fly with me as well. I appreciate that. We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right.
Thank you.